The morning sun cast long shadows across the training compound at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. Staff Sergeant Marcus "Ghost" Thompson adjusted his spotting scope one final time, watching the heat waves dance above the distant target range. At 3,800 meters away, the human-shaped silhouette looked like a speck of dust against the brown hillside. "Impossible shot," muttered Gunnery Sergeant Rodriguez from the Marine Corps, wiping sweat from his forehead despite the cool October air. Nobody makes a kill at that distance with standard equipment. The competition had drawn the best long-range shooters from every branch of the military. 9 snipers had already attempted the shot that military historians would later call the impossible mile. Each had missed, despite using the most advanced rifles and optics available to the U.S. Armed Forces. Thompson remained silent, studying the wind patterns through his scope. Born and raised in rural Montana, he had learned to read the land before he could properly read books. His grandfather, a Korean War veteran, had taught him that patience was a sniper's greatest weapon. "The mountains will teach you everything you need to know," the old man used to say. "Just learn to listen." The other competitors represented the elite of American military marksmanship. Army Rangers, Marine Scout snipers, Air Force security forces, and Special Operations units had all sent their finest shooters. The competition served as both a training exercise and a way to push the boundaries of long-range engagement capabilities. Master Sergeant Kelly from Delta Force checked his equipment one more time. His custom rifle, worth more than most people's cars, featured every technological advancement money could buy. Computer-assisted ballistics calculations, advanced weather monitoring systems, and precision machine components promised accuracy beyond anything previous generations of soldiers could imagine. "Weather's shifting again," called out Lieutenant Colonel Harrison, the range officer supervising the event. "Winds picking up from the northwest, gusting to 15 knots. The first shooter, a legendary Army Ranger named Kowalski, had served 3 tours in Afghanistan. His reputation for impossible shots had earned him a Silver Star and the respect of everyone on the range. He settled behind his rifle with practiced confidence. The .338 Lapua Magnum round exploded from the barrel with a sharp crack that echoed across the valley. Through spotting scopes, observers tracked the bullet's path for nearly 6 seconds before seeing dirt kick up 2 meters to the left of the target. "Close," Harrison announced. But no cigar. One by one, the other 8 snipers took their turns. Each brought years of experience, advanced equipment, and reputations built on successful missions around the world. The Marine Corps representative, Staff Sergeant Williams, had once made a confirmed kill at 2,400 meters in Iraq. His shot sailed high, passing over the target by what appeared to be inches. Thompson watched each attempt carefully, noting how the wind affected bullet trajectory at different points during its flight. The distance was so extreme that environmental factors became exponentially more significant. Temperature, humidity, air pressure, and wind direction all had to be calculated perfectly. Chief Petty Officer Sarah Chun from Navy Special Warfare represented the newest generation of precision shooters. Her rifle incorporated artificial intelligence assistance for ballistics calculations. The computer could process environmental data faster than any human, yet her shot still fell short by several meters. "Equipment can only take you so far," Thompson's grandfather had once explained during a hunting trip in the Bitterroot Mountains. "Eventually, you have to trust your instincts and understand what the land is telling you." The Air Force competitor, Technical Sergeant Brooks, had earned his reputation in the mountains of Afghanistan. His spotter called wind corrections based on advanced meteorological equipment that could measure wind speed and direction at multiple points between the firing position and target. Despite all the technology, his bullet struck the ground 10 meters right of the target. As each sniper failed, tension mounted among the observers. Military brass from multiple branches had gathered to witness what many considered an impossible demonstration of marksmanship. The 3,800-meter distance pushed beyond the effective range of standard military weapons systems. Special Forces Master Sergeant Davis made his attempt with calm precision. His rifle, a custom-built system designed specifically for extreme long-range work, represented the pinnacle of current military technology. The shot seemed perfect as it left the barrel, but the bullet drifted left in the final seconds of flight. Thompson noticed something the others had missed. A small depression in the terrain about 2,000 meters downrange created a wind shadow effect. The computer models couldn't account for such subtle geographical features, but someone who had spent decades reading mountain weather patterns could see how air currents would behave. The 8th shooter, Army Special Forces Sergeant First Class Martinez, had trained with Thompson on previous occasions. Known for his ability to adapt to challenging conditions, Martinez adjusted his aim point based on observations from previous shots. His bullet came closest yet, missing by less than a meter. Last chance for regulation attempts, Harrison announced. Anyone else want to give it a try before we call it? The 9th sniper, Navy SEAL Petty Officer First Class Jackson, had remained quiet throughout the competition. Known for unconventional thinking and adaptability, Jackson made minute adjustments to his rifle based on what he had observed. His shot whistled downrange, and, for a moment, everyone thought it might connect. The bullet struck inches from the target center, but still counted as a miss. A disappointed murmur ran through the gathered crowd. Some of the best snipers in the world had failed to achieve what many considered theoretically possible, but practically impossible. Gentlemen, excellent shooting today, Harrison began his closing remarks. While nobody achieved a hit at this extreme range, we've gathered valuable data about the limits of current equipment and techniques. Thompson had been studying the target through his spotting scope for the entire morning. Unlike the others, he wasn't focused on the technology or the ballistics tables. Instead, he watched how dust moved in the distance, how light bent through the heat layers, and how the wind patterns shifted with the changing temperature. Sir, Thompson's quiet voice cut through the post-competition discussions. Request permission to attempt the shot. The conversation stopped. Everyone turned to look at the soft-spoken SEAL who had been observing silently from the edge of the group. Thompson rarely spoke during competitions, earning him the nickname Ghost, not just for his ability to remain unseen in combat, but for his quiet presence in any gathering. You weren't registered for the competition, Sergeant Thompson, Harrison replied, checking his paperwork. This was by invitation only. I understand, sir. But if the goal is to determine whether the shot is possible, I'd like to try. Several of the competitors exchanged glances. They knew Thompson's reputation from joint operations, but he had never been known as a competition shooter. His strengths lay in combat effectiveness and mission success rather than range records. Master Sergeant Kelly spoke up. No offense, Thompson, but if we couldn't make it with our equipment, what makes you think you can? Thompson looked across the range toward the distant target, then back at the group of elite shooters. Different approach, maybe. The wind had been shifting throughout the morning, but Thompson had noticed a pattern. Every 23 minutes, the air current stabilized for approximately 90 seconds. It wasn't enough time for most shooters to set up and take a carefully planned shot, but it created a window of opportunity for someone who was already prepared. What rifle are you using? Asked Rodriguez, curious despite his skepticism. Thompson gestured toward a worn but well-maintained rifle case nearby. Standard M24, sir. Same one I've been using for 8 years. The gathered shooters looked at each other with expressions ranging from confusion to disbelief. The M24 sniper weapon system was reliable and accurate, but it was older technology compared to the advanced custom rifles that had already failed to make the shot. That's not even close to optimal for this distance, Chin pointed out. The ballistics aren't designed for extreme long-range work. Understood, Thompson replied simply. Harrison considered the unusual request. The day's official competition was over, but allowing one more attempt might provide additional data for military research purposes. What do you think, gentlemen? Any objections to letting Sergeant Thompson take a shot? Most of the competitors shrugged or nodded approval. After their own failures, they were curious to see what approach the quiet SEAL might take. Some seemed amused by the idea of attempting the impossible shot with older equipment. Make it interesting, suggested Jackson. If Thompson makes the shot, drinks are on us for a month. And if he misses like the rest of us? Asked Davis. Then he buys the first round tonight, Jackson grinned. Thompson nodded acceptance of the informal wager. He had no interest in the bet itself, but he understood that military culture often required such gestures to maintain group cohesion and respect. Moving to his equipment case, Thompson began his preparation with deliberate, economical movements. Unlike the high-tech systems used by other shooters, his setup appeared almost primitive by comparison. No computer assistance, no advanced weather monitoring equipment, just a reliable rifle and decades of experience reading natural conditions. He checked his rifle's zero, confirmed his ammunition selection, and settled into a prone firing position. The target seemed impossibly small through his scope at maximum magnification, barely visible as a dark shape against the hillside. "Wind's still gusting," called out Williams, checking his handheld anemometer. 12 to 15 knots, variable direction. Thompson didn't acknowledge the wind report. Instead, he watched dust patterns, observed grass movement, and felt air currents against his skin. His breathing slowed to a steady rhythm as he entered the focused mental state that had kept him alive through multiple combat deployments. The other snipers gathered behind him, some using spotting scopes to observe his technique. Most expected another miss, but professional courtesy demanded they provide proper observation and feedback. Thompson's finger found the trigger as he settled into his natural respiratory pause. The crosshairs held steady on what he calculated as the proper lead point for wind and bullet drop. At this extreme distance, he was aiming several meters above and to the side of the actual target. Time seemed suspended as Thompson waited for the wind pattern he had been tracking all morning. The gusts died down, leaves stopped moving, and, for just a moment, the air became still across the entire valley. The M24 fired with a familiar crack that Thompson had heard thousands of times in training and combat. The bullet began its 6-second journey across the mountainous terrain, carrying with it the hopes of proving that human instinct and experience could sometimes triumph over technology and equipment advantages. Through spotting scopes, observers tracked the bullet's path as it arced high above the valley floor. At this distance, they could actually see the projectile's trajectory for most of its flight time. "On target," someone called out. "Maybe a little right," added another voice. The bullet maintained its path, fighting against gravity and wind resistance as it traveled further than most people could accurately throw a baseball. Environmental factors that seemed minor at shorter distances became critical variables at this extreme range. "Impact," Harrison announced, though the distance made immediate assessment difficult. Through his rifle scope, Thompson had lost sight of the bullet after the first 2 seconds of flight. At 3,800 meters, even experienced spotters needed several seconds to determine shot placement. The range officer activated his radio to contact the personnel stationed near the target area. "Target observation, this is Control. Request immediate impact assessment at position 7. Static crackled over the radio for several seconds before a response came back. "Control, target observation. Confirm impact assessment in progress. Stand by." The gathering of elite snipers waited in tense silence. Even those who expected another miss found themselves hoping that somehow, against all odds, the quiet SEAL with his standard-issue rifle had accomplished what their advanced equipment could not. "Control, target observation." The radio crackled again. "We have impact. Copy that. What's the damage assessment?" Another pause filled the air as range personnel examined the target area more closely. Thompson remained in his firing position, scope still trained downrange, waiting for official confirmation of his shot placement. "Control, target observation. Impact appears to be. Jesus Christ, that's a center mass hit." Silence fell over the range like a heavy blanket. The radio crackled with static as everyone processed what they had just heard. Center mass hit at 3,800 meters with standard military equipment. It seemed impossible, yet the target observers had no reason to lie about such a thing. "Say again, target observation," Harrison requested, his voice carrying a note of disbelief. "Control, confirmed center mass impact on target 7. Clean hit, approximately 4 inches from center. Target is down." A collective exhale seemed to escape from the gathered snipers. Master Sergeant Kelly lowered his spotting scope and stared at Thompson, who was calmly working the bolt on his M24 and ejecting the spent brass casing. "How?" Rodriguez asked, voicing the question everyone was thinking. Thompson sat up from his firing position and began cleaning his rifle with the methodical care that had become second nature during his military career. "Wind pattern," he said simply. "Changes every 23 minutes. Give or take 30 seconds. We all had access to wind data." Chen pointed out, still struggling to process what had just happened. The meteorological equipment showed constant variations. Equipment shows what's happening at the firing point and target area, Thompson explained while running a cleaning rod through his barrel. Doesn't account for what the bullet encounters during flight time. Jackson shook his head in amazement. 6 seconds of flight time. You're talking about predicting wind conditions across nearly 2.5 miles of terrain for a 6-second window. Grandfather taught me to read weather patterns in the Bitterroot Mountains, Thompson said. Spent every summer tracking elk through country where wind could change directions 3 times between ridgelines. The explanation sounded too simple for what they had just witnessed. These were elite military marksmen who had trained for years to understand ballistics, environmental conditions, and precision shooting techniques. Yet a SEAL with older equipment had succeeded where they had failed. Williams walked over to examine Thompson's rifle more closely. The M24 showed signs of extensive use, but meticulous maintenance. The stock bore scuff marks from field operations, but the action worked smoothly, and the barrel appeared to be in excellent condition. Standard military ammunition? Williams asked. Thompson nodded. M118LR, same batch everyone else was using today. No modifications to the rifle? Trigger job about 3 years ago, but nothing fancy. Mostly just keeps it reliable. The simplicity of Thompson's setup made his success even more remarkable. While other competitors had used custom rifles worth tens of thousands of dollars, precision-loaded ammunition, and computer-assisted calculations, he had achieved an impossible shot with basic military equipment. Lieutenant Colonel Harrison was already on his radio, reporting the results to higher command. A confirmed hit at 3,800 meters would have significant implications for military tactical planning and equipment procurement decisions. They want us to verify the hit, Harrison announced. We're taking vehicles out to the target area to photograph and measure the impact. The convoy of military vehicles made its way across the training area toward the distant target. Thompson rode in silence, listening as other snipers discussed the technical aspects of what they had witnessed. Their conversations focused on ballistics calculations, equipment comparisons, and attempts to quantify what had made the difference. Maybe it was just luck, suggested Davis. At that distance, so many variables come into play that chance becomes a significant factor. Luck doesn't account for reading wind patterns, Kelly countered. There was definitely skill involved, even if we can't explain how he did it. The target area revealed clear evidence of Thompson's shot. The human-shaped silhouette target showed a clean bullet hole approximately 4 inches left of center mass. At 3,800 meters, such accuracy represented shooting that exceeded the capabilities of most military sniper systems. Range personnel had already marked the impact point and were taking photographs for official documentation. The bullet had passed completely through the target and embedded in the dirt backstop behind it. Clean entry, no signs of ricochet or deflection, reported the range officer. Looks like a direct hit at full velocity. Thompson examined the target with professional interest, but without emotion. He had achieved what he set out to do, proving that the shot was possible under the right conditions. The technical achievement satisfied his curiosity about pushing the limits of his equipment and skills. How often do those wind conditions occur? Harrison asked. Thompson studied the surrounding terrain, noting the ridgelines, valleys, and vegetation patterns that influenced local weather. In this area, probably twice a day during stable weather. Morning and late afternoon when thermal heating patterns create predictable air movement. So this isn't a technique that could be used reliably in combat? Depends on the situation, Thompson replied. In mountains like Afghanistan, experienced spotters can learn to read terrain effects. Takes time to study an area, though, not something you could do during a rapid deployment. The return trip to the main range gave everyone time to process the implications of what they had witnessed. Military doctrine for long-range engagement would need to be reconsidered if skilled marksmen could achieve hits at previously impossible distances. Back at the range, word of Thompson's shot had already spread throughout the base. Personnel from various units gathered to hear first-hand accounts of the impossible mile shot. Stories in military communities had a way of growing with each telling. But this time the witnesses were all experienced snipers whose credibility could not be questioned. Drinks are definitely on us, Jackson announced, approaching Thompson with a grin. That was the most impressive piece of shooting I've ever seen. Just got lucky with the timing, Thompson replied, deflecting the praise with characteristic modesty. Bullshit, Rodriguez interjected. Luck doesn't read wind patterns for 6 hours, and then make a perfect shot when conditions align. That was pure skill. Thompson's achievement represented more than just an impressive demonstration of marksmanship. It highlighted the ongoing debate within military circles about the balance between technology and human expertise. While advanced equipment provided significant advantages, experience and intuitive understanding of environmental conditions still played crucial roles. Master Sergeant Kelly had been analyzing his own failed attempts throughout the afternoon. "I've been thinking about what went wrong with my shot," he said to Thompson. "All my calculations were based on average wind conditions across the flight path. Averages don't account for terrain effects," Thompson agreed. "Bullet spends different amounts of time at different altitudes and locations. Wind at 2,000 meters might be completely different from wind at 3,000. But how do you calculate for that without sophisticated modeling equipment?" Thompson pointed toward the distant mountains visible beyond the range. "Spend enough time in country like that, you learn to see how air moves. Ridgelines create predictable patterns. Valleys channel wind in specific directions. Trees and rocks tell you what the air is doing." The conversation continued as the group made their way to the base club for the promised celebration. Thompson found himself reluctantly at the center of attention, answering questions about techniques and training methods that most people couldn't fully understand. Chen was particularly interested in the mental aspects of extreme long-range shooting. "How do you maintain confidence when attempting a shot that everyone says is impossible?" "Don't think about whether it's possible," Thompson replied. "Just focus on doing everything right. Proper position, correct hold, steady trigger press. If you do your part, the bullet will do its part." But at that distance, so many things can go wrong. Same things can go wrong at any distance. Just more obvious when you miss by meters instead of inches. The celebration at the club took on a different tone than anyone had expected. Instead of commiserating over shared failure, the group found themselves analyzing and learning from an extraordinary success. Thompson's achievement had elevated the entire competition from a simple marksmanship exercise to a masterclass in precision shooting. Williams raised his glass in a toast to Sergeant Thompson for proving that sometimes the old ways still work best, and for showing us that we still have a lot to learn, added Davis. Thompson accepted the recognition graciously, but remained uncomfortable with being the center of attention. His personality had always been more suited to quiet competence than public acclaim. The shot had been satisfying from a technical standpoint, but he was ready to return to normal duties and routine training. Colonel Harrison joined the group later in the evening with official word from higher command. "Pentagon wants a full report on today's shooting," he announced. "There's significant interest in understanding how this shot was possible and whether the techniques can be taught to other marksmen." "Going to be hard to teach 30 years of mountain experience in a classroom," Thompson observed. "Maybe, but we have to try. If one person can make this shot, maybe others can learn to do it too." The implications of Thompson's success would extend far beyond a single impressive shot. Military training programs would need to be evaluated and potentially restructured. Equipment procurement decisions might be influenced by the demonstration that human skill could sometimes overcome technological limitations. Kowalski, the Army Ranger who had taken the first shot of the day, approached Thompson with a question that had been bothering him. "I've been thinking about your wind reading technique. How long did you study the conditions before deciding to take the shot?" "Started watching when the first shooter set up," Thompson replied. "Takes time to see the patterns." "So you were analyzing conditions for what? 3 hours?" "About that, yes. Most tactical situations don't give you that kind of preparation time." Thompson nodded agreement. This was ideal conditions for long-range work. Combat situations are usually different. More pressure, less time, less perfect setup. The acknowledgement that his shot had been achieved under optimal conditions didn't diminish its significance, but it provided important context for understanding when such techniques might be applicable in real-world scenarios. As the evening progressed, the conversation gradually shifted from technical analysis to broader discussions of military service and shared experiences. Thompson found himself more comfortable once the focus moved away from his individual achievement. Jackson told stories about SEAL training in various environments, while Rodriguez shared experiences from Marine deployments in mountainous terrain. The common thread in their experiences was the importance of adapting to local conditions and learning from environmental factors. Every deployment teaches you something new, Kelly observed. Different country, different weather patterns, different challenges. Best training is experience, Thompson agreed. Can't learn everything in a classroom or on a static range. The gathering began to break up as evening turned to night. Tomorrow would bring normal duties and routine training, but everyone present would remember the day when a quiet SEAL had achieved the impossible with patience, skill, and an intimate understanding of natural conditions. Thompson packed his equipment methodically, ensuring everything was properly cleaned and stored. His rifle case showed its age, but protected the weapon that had just made history. The M24 would return to normal service, ready for whatever missions lay ahead. Walking back to his quarters, Thompson reflected on the day's events. The shot had been technically challenging and personally satisfying, but it was just one moment in a career dedicated to serving his country. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new opportunities to apply his skills in defense of his fellow Americans. The mountain air carried the scent of pine and distant snow, reminding him of childhood hunting trips with his grandfather. Those early lessons about reading the land and understanding weather patterns had shaped not just his shooting ability, but his entire approach to military service. The mountains will teach you everything you need to know, the old man had said. Just learn to listen. Tonight, Thompson could almost hear his grandfather's approval carried on the wind. 3 weeks after the impossible shot at Fort Bragg, Thompson found himself sitting in a sterile briefing room at the Pentagon. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as military officials from multiple branches reviewed files and prepared questions about his shooting technique. Sergeant Thompson, began General Patricia Morgan, Army Deputy Chief of Staff. Your demonstration has generated considerable interest throughout the Department of Defense. We need to understand whether your methods can be systematized and taught to other personnel. Thompson sat at attention, uncomfortable with the formal setting but understanding the importance of the meeting. His achievement had apparently reached the highest levels of military command, creating expectations he wasn't sure he could fulfill. With respect, ma'am, what I did wasn't really a method or system. It was just experience applied to specific conditions. Colonel David Richardson from Marine Corps Headquarters leaned forward. But experience can be shared, Sergeant. Your background and training created that expertise. We need to understand how to replicate it. The room contained representatives from Army Special Operations, Marine Corps Forces Special Operations Command, Naval Special Warfare, and Air Force Special Operations. Each branch wanted to understand how Thompson's techniques might benefit their own sniper programs. Walk us through your thought process, requested General Morgan. From the moment you observed the first missed shot until you decided to attempt the shot yourself. Thompson gathered his thoughts, trying to translate intuitive knowledge into words that military planners could understand. The first thing I noticed was that all the shooters were calculating based on point-specific wind data, measuring conditions at the firing position and target area, then averaging for the flight path. That's standard ballistics procedure, noted Air Force Colonel James Wesley. How would you approach it differently? Terrain influences wind patterns in ways that can't be averaged, Thompson explained. A bullet spends 6 seconds traveling through different air masses, different altitudes, different pressure zones. Each segment of the flight path has its own conditions. Major Sarah Kim from Army Special Operations took notes as Thompson spoke. How do you account for those variations without sophisticated measuring equipment? Learn to read the landscape, Thompson replied. Mountains create predictable wind patterns. Valleys channel airflow. Even vegetation responds to atmospheric pressure changes in consistent ways. The explanation sounded almost mystical to officers accustomed to technical specifications and quantified procedures. Military doctrine emphasized repeatable processes that could be taught through standardized training programs. Give us a specific example, requested General Morgan. How did the terrain at Fort Bragg influence your shot? Thompson stood and moved to a topographical map of the training area that had been mounted on one wall. There's a depression here, about 2,000 meters from the firing position. Creates a wind shadow effect that diverts air currents upward. He traced the terrain features with his finger, showing how ridgelines and valleys would channel wind flow. Most of the day, wind comes from the northwest. But this depression creates a circular pattern that reverses direction every 23 minutes. How did you determine the timing? Asked Colonel Richardson. Watched dust patterns, grass movement, heat shimmer effects. Natural indicators that show air movement more accurately than instruments measuring single points. Major Kim looked skeptical. You're describing pattern recognition that would take years to develop. How do we compress that into practical training timeframes? The question highlighted the core challenge facing military planners. Thompson's expertise had been developed over decades of outdoor experience, starting in childhood and refined through military service in various environments. Creating a curriculum that could produce similar results in months rather than years seemed nearly impossible. Maybe start with basics, Thompson suggested. Teach shooters to observe natural wind indicators instead of relying only on instruments. Spend time in different terrain types. Learn how geographical features influence air movement. General Morgan exchanged glances with her colleagues. The Pentagon was looking for solutions that could be implemented quickly across multiple training programs. Thompson's recommendations would require fundamental changes to how snipers were trained. What about equipment modifications? Asked Colonel Wesley. Could technology help bridge the experience gap? Thompson considered the question carefully. His success had been achieved with standard military equipment, but he understood the appeal of technological solutions for training and deployment scenarios. Technology can provide data, he said finally. But interpreting that data still requires understanding how environmental factors interact. Computer models are only as good as the variables they include. Explain what you mean by that, requested Major Kim. Weather monitoring equipment tells you wind speed and direction at specific points. But it doesn't account for how terrain features modify those conditions. A computer model might predict average wind speed across a flight path, but it can't factor in microclimates created by rock formations or vegetation patterns. The discussion continued for several hours as military planners tried to extract practical applications from Thompson's approach. Each question revealed the complexity of translating intuitive knowledge into teachable techniques. Colonel Richardson raised a concern that had been discussed in planning meetings. Your method worked under ideal conditions with time for extended observation. How applicable would these techniques be in combat scenarios? Limited applicability in most situations, Thompson admitted. Combat rarely provides 3 hours of preparation time. But understanding environmental factors still improves shooting accuracy at any distance. So you're saying this isn't a tactical solution for immediate implementation? It's one tool in the toolbox, Thompson replied. Useful when conditions allow, but not a replacement for conventional shooting techniques. The honesty in Thompson's assessment didn't align with what Pentagon planners had hoped to hear. They were looking for breakthrough capabilities that could provide immediate advantages in current conflicts. General Morgan shifted the discussion toward broader training implications. Even if the specific technique can't be widely applied, are there elements of your approach that could enhance existing sniper training programs? Environmental awareness training, Thompson suggested. Teaching shooters to read terrain and weather patterns. Spending more time outdoors in different conditions instead of just on static ranges. That would require significant changes to current training schedules, noted Colonel Wesley. Yes, sir, but it might produce better field-ready snipers. The conversation highlighted fundamental differences in military thinking between technological solutions and experience-based expertise. Modern military doctrine emphasized standardized procedures and technological force multipliers, while Thompson's success had come from traditional fieldcraft skills. Major Kim asked about the psychological aspects of attempting seemingly impossible shots. How do you maintain confidence when attempting something that has never been done before? Don't think about whether it's been done, Thompson replied. Focus on executing proper technique. If you do everything right technically, the result takes care of itself. But surely there must be some doubt when attempting a shot at the limits of equipment capability? Doubt interferes with execution. Better to trust your preparation and commit fully to the shot. The mindset Thompson described was familiar to special operations personnel, but difficult to quantify for training purposes. Military psychologists had studied confidence and performance under pressure, but translating those findings into practical training remained challenging. As the briefing continued, it became clear that Thompson's achievement represented both an opportunity and a problem for military planners. The demonstration proved that current equipment capabilities exceeded previous estimates, but the skills required to exploit those capabilities couldn't be easily replicated. "Let's discuss implementation possibilities," said General Morgan. "What would a training program based on your methods look like?" Thompson had given this question considerable thought since being summoned to Washington. Start with experienced snipers who already have solid fundamentals. Add intensive environmental training in different terrain types. Mountain environments, desert conditions, coastal areas with different atmospheric characteristics. Duration: minimum 6 months. Probably longer to develop real proficiency. That's significantly longer than current sniper training programs, noted Colonel Richardson. Yes, sir. But it would produce snipers with capabilities beyond what current training provides. The cost and time requirements for such training would be substantial. Military budgets were already stretched thin, and adding months to training programs would reduce throughput and increase expenses significantly. Air Force Colonel Wesley raised practical deployment concerns. Even if we could train snipers in these techniques, how would we ensure they have opportunities to apply them in actual operations? That's the real limitation, Thompson acknowledged. Most military operations don't provide ideal conditions for extreme long-range shooting. Urban environments, time pressures, safety constraints all limit opportunities for shots like this. The admission highlighted a disconnect between impressive training achievements and practical battlefield application. Thompson's shot had been remarkable, but its relevance to current military needs remained questionable. General Morgan summarized the discussion. "So we have a demonstrated capability that requires extensive training to develop and limited opportunities to employ operationally. That's a fair assessment, ma'am. What's your recommendation for how the military should proceed?" Thompson considered the question carefully. His recommendation would influence training programs and resource allocation decisions affecting thousands of personnel. "Selective implementation," he said finally. "Identify experienced snipers with aptitude for this type of work. Provide enhanced environmental training for specific mission requirements. Don't try to make it universal, but develop the capability where it makes sense." How would you identify candidates with appropriate aptitude? Look for personnel with outdoor backgrounds, hunting experience, wilderness activities, familiarity with reading weather patterns, military experience in varied terrain types. The recommendation made sense, but complicated personnel selection and training pipelines. Military efficiency often depended on standardized processes that could be applied broadly rather than specialized programs for select individuals. Major Kim asked about equipment recommendations. Should we be investing in more advanced rifles and optics systems, or focusing on training improvements? Both have value, Thompson replied. Better equipment makes difficult shots easier. But equipment alone won't compensate for lack of environmental awareness and shooting fundamentals. If you had to choose between equipment upgrades and training improvements, training, Thompson said without hesitation. A skilled shooter with standard equipment will outperform an average shooter with advanced gear. The preference for training over technology ran counter to many military procurement trends. Defense contractors promoted technological solutions that promised to enhance capability without requiring extensive training modifications. General Morgan checked her watch and realized the briefing had been running longer than scheduled. Final question, Sergeant. If you were designing a sniper training program from scratch, what would be your top 3 priorities? Thompson thought for a moment before responding. First, solid shooting fundamentals. Can't build advanced techniques on a weak foundation. Second, extensive field time in varied conditions. Classroom learning only goes so far. Third, developing judgment about when to take difficult shots and when to wait for better opportunities. The judgment aspect is interesting. Expand on that. Knowing your limitations is as important as pushing them. In combat, a missed shot can compromise an entire mission. Sometimes the smart choice is not to shoot. The insight reflected hard-earned wisdom that couldn't be taught through conventional instruction methods. Understanding when not to attempt difficult shots required experience and maturity that developed over time. As the briefing concluded, Thompson realized he had probably disappointed the military officials who had hoped for simple solutions to complex training challenges. His honest assessment of limitations and implementation difficulties wouldn't generate enthusiasm for major program changes. "Thank you for your time, Sergeant Thompson," said General Morgan. "We'll be reviewing your recommendations and determining appropriate next steps." Walking out of the Pentagon, Thompson felt relieved to be finished with the formal briefing process. The fluorescent lights and sterile conference room atmosphere were far removed from the mountain environments where his skills had been developed. His achievement at Fort Bragg had been personally satisfying, but the follow-up process had revealed how difficult it could be to translate individual excellence into institutional capability. The military needed solutions that could be applied broadly and consistently, while his success had come from highly individualized expertise. The train ride back to his base provided time to reflect on the day's discussions and their implications for his own career. The attention from senior leadership was flattering, but Thompson preferred the straightforward challenges of operational assignments to the political complexities of program development. Tonight he would return to normal duties and routine training, grateful for the opportunity to serve, but ready to move beyond the spotlight generated by one exceptional shot. 6 months after the Pentagon briefing, Thompson found himself in the mountains of Afghanistan, applying his skills in an environment far removed from training ranges and conference rooms. The mission had come through Special Operations Command with minimal details and maximum urgency. Intel suggests high-value target will be moving through this valley sometime in the next 48 hours, briefed Lieutenant Commander Sarah Walsh, the mission officer. Problem is, our closest overwatch position is 3,200 meters from the target area. Thompson studied the topographical maps spread across the Tactical Operations Center table. The terrain was familiar from previous deployments, but the distance requirements created significant challenges for mission success. "Weather forecast?" he asked, already knowing that atmospheric conditions would be critical for any shot at that range. "Variable winds, typical for this altitude and season. Nothing unusual predicted, but mountain weather changes quickly." Petty Officer First Class Mike Santos, Thompson's spotter for this mission, pointed to potential observation positions marked on the map. These ridgelines offer decent concealment, but the shooting angles aren't ideal. Thompson traced potential bullet trajectories with his finger, calculating how terrain features would influence flight paths at extreme range. "This position here gives us the best geometry, but it's exposed to wind from 3 directions. Can you make the shot from there?" asked Lieutenant Commander Walsh. "Depends on conditions when the target appears. Might have to wait for the right moment." The honest assessment reflected lessons learned from his experience at Fort Bragg. Extreme long-range shooting required patience and favorable conditions that couldn't be guaranteed in operational environments. Team insertion took place under cover of darkness, using helicopter transport to within 5 kilometers of their objective area. The remaining approach would be on foot through mountainous terrain that offered both concealment and significant physical challenges. Thompson carried his familiar M24 rifle along with additional equipment specific to this mission. Extended operations in remote areas required more supplies than training exercises, but weight considerations limited what could be brought into the field. Santos packed spotting equipment and communications gear that would allow them to coordinate with supporting elements. His experience as a spotter included multiple deployments and familiarity with Thompson's shooting techniques. "How long since you've attempted a shot at this distance in combat?" Santos asked as they moved through the darkness toward their objective. "Never," Thompson replied honestly. "Training ranges are different from field conditions. Pressure getting to you?" "Not pressure, just realistic about variables we can't control." The approach to their observation position took most of the night, moving carefully through terrain that could conceal enemy forces. Taliban fighters were known to operate in this area, making stealth and vigilance essential for mission success. Dawn found them established in a concealed position overlooking the target valley. The view was spectacular and tactically advantageous, but the extreme distance to potential target areas would challenge even Thompson's proven abilities. Santos began establishing communications with headquarters while Thompson studied environmental conditions through his rifle scope. Wind patterns in the mountains were complex, influenced by altitude, terrain features, and thermal effects that changed throughout the day. Overwatch established, Santos reported over encrypted radio, standing by for target identification. The first day passed without contact. Intelligence indicated that enemy movement in the area was sporadic and unpredictable. Thompson used the time to study wind patterns and familiarize himself with how atmospheric conditions changed throughout the day. Different from Fort Bragg, he observed to Santos during an afternoon lull. How so? Air density at this altitude. Temperature variations are more extreme. Terrain effects are more pronounced. Each factor would influence bullet trajectory in ways that couldn't be precisely calculated. Thompson's success would depend on reading conditions accurately and timing his shot to coincide with favorable atmospheric circumstances. The second morning brought intelligence updates indicating increased enemy activity in their area of observation. Thompson settled behind his rifle as Santos monitored communications and conducted detailed observation of the valley below. Movement, Santos reported quietly. 3 individuals, approximately 2,500 meters, moving north along the ridgeline. Thompson acquired the targets through his scope, confirming that distance and angle would allow engagement if positive identification could be established. Need confirmation before engaging. Military rules of engagement required positive identification of legitimate targets before employing deadly force. In this case, that meant visual confirmation of specific individuals known to be enemy combatants. Headquarters, this is Overwatch, Santos transmitted. We have movement in target area. Request guidance on target identification. The response came back within minutes. Overwatch, headquarters. Continue observation. Target package includes 3 individuals expected to transit your area today. For the next 2 hours, Thompson tracked the distant figures through his rifle scope, while Santos provided detailed descriptions to intelligence personnel who could confirm target identities. The process was methodical but necessary to ensure mission success while minimizing risk of engaging wrong individuals. Positive identification confirmed. Came the radio message that Thompson had been waiting for. You are authorized to engage designated targets. Thompson had been studying wind conditions for the entire morning, noting patterns that repeated with some regularity. Unlike the controlled environment at Fort Bragg, these conditions were constantly shifting and unpredictable. Range to target? He asked Santos. 3,100 meters, elevation angle 12 degrees down. The distance was within the theoretical capability of his equipment, but environmental factors made success uncertain. Wind speed varied significantly with altitude, and temperature differences between his position and the target area would influence bullet trajectory. Wind call. Santos checked his instruments and observed natural indicators. Variable, gusting 8 to 15 knots from multiple directions. No consistent pattern. Thompson continued observation, waiting for conditions that might allow a successful engagement. The targets had stopped moving and taken positions that suggested they might remain stationary for some time. We might not get a better opportunity, Santos pointed out. They're in the open, range is stable. Wind conditions aren't right yet, Thompson replied, maintaining his observation through the rifle scope. Patience had been crucial to his success at Fort Bragg, and he understood that rushing a shot in combat conditions could result in mission failure. The targets weren't going anywhere immediately, allowing time to wait for more favorable circumstances. 20 minutes later, Thompson noticed a subtle change in wind patterns. The gusty conditions that had been present all morning seemed to be stabilizing as atmospheric pressure shifted with changing temperature. Winds settling down, he observed. Santos confirmed the observation with his instruments. Dropping to steady 6 knots from the northwest. Thompson settled into his firing position, controlling his breathing as he had done thousands of times in training and previous combat operations. At this extreme range, every aspect of his technique needed to be perfect. The crosshairs found their proper position, leading the target by the calculated amount for wind drift and accounting for bullet drop over the extended range. Thompson's finger found the trigger as he entered his natural respiratory pause. The shot felt right as it broke, the rifle recoiling smoothly as the bullet began its journey across the mountainous terrain. At this distance, bullet flight time would be over 5 seconds, giving ample opportunity for variables to influence trajectory. On the way, Thompson announced, maintaining his scope picture to observe bullet impact. Santos tracked the bullet path through his spotting scope, calling out observations. Good trajectory, looks on target. The bullet struck exactly where Thompson had aimed, confirming that his reading of environmental conditions had been accurate. The target dropped immediately, while the other two individuals sought cover among the rocky terrain. Target down, Santos reported over radio. Clean hit at 3,100 meters. Outstanding, came the response from headquarters. Continue observation and report any additional movement. The successful engagement represented more than just an impressive shot. It demonstrated that extreme long-range capabilities could have practical application in operational environments when conditions and timing aligned properly. The remaining targets had taken cover and were no longer visible from Thompson's position. Without clear shots available, the mission shifted to observation and intelligence gathering about enemy activity in the area. Think the other targets will move? Santos asked. Probably wait until dark, Thompson replied. That shot came from nowhere as far as they're concerned. They won't know where the threat is located. The psychological impact of long-range precision fire often exceeded its immediate tactical effect. Enemy forces would be reluctant to move through areas where they might be observed and engage from unknown positions. Throughout the afternoon, Thompson and Santos maintained observation while reporting enemy activity to intelligence personnel. The successful engagement had disrupted planned enemy movement and provided valuable information about tactical patterns in the area. As evening approached, extraction helicopters were en route to their pickup zone. The mission had achieved its primary objectives while demonstrating operational applications for extreme long-range shooting capabilities. Successful mission, Walsh radioed as they prepared for extraction. Intelligence value of the engagement exceeded expectations. During the helicopter flight back to base, Thompson reflected on the differences between his training shot at Fort Bragg and today's combat engagement. Both had required patience, environmental awareness, and precise execution, but the operational environment had added complexity that couldn't be replicated in training. How did it feel different from the range shot? Santos asked over the aircraft intercom. More variables to consider, Thompson replied. Mission pressure, target movement, communication requirements. Range shooting is pure technique. Combat adds layers of complexity. Do you think other snipers could learn to do what you did today? Thompson considered the question carefully. With enough training and experience, maybe. But it's not something that could be taught quickly or applied universally. The honest assessment reflected his understanding that extreme long-range capabilities required exceptional circumstances to be effective operationally. Training could develop the skills, but applying them in combat required favorable conditions and appropriate mission parameters. Back at base, the mission debrief focused on tactical lessons and intelligence value rather than the impressive nature of Thompson's shot. Military operations were evaluated on mission success rather than individual achievements. Range and conditions were at the limit of practical engagement capability, Thompson reported. Success required ideal environmental factors that might not be available in different circumstances. Recommendations for future operations? Asked the intelligence officer conducting the debrief. Use these capabilities selectively when conditions favor success. Don't plan operations that depend on extreme long-range shots unless backup options are available. The practical advice would influence how special operations planners integrated long-range capabilities into future missions. Thompson's success had demonstrated what was possible, but his honest assessment of limitations would prevent unrealistic expectations. Later that evening, Thompson cleaned and inspected his rifle with the same methodical care he had shown after the Fort Bragg demonstration. The M24 had performed flawlessly under combat conditions, proving that reliable equipment and skilled hands could achieve exceptional results. A message from his former teammates back at Fort Bragg congratulated him on the successful mission. Word of his combat application of extreme long-range techniques had spread quickly through special operations communities. "Heard you put that training to good use," read the message from Jackson. "Guess those drinks we owed you were worth it." Thompson smiled at the reference to their informal wager after his impossible shot. The camaraderie of military service created bonds that extended far beyond individual achievements or recognition. Tomorrow would bring new missions and different challenges. Tonight, Thompson was content knowing that his skills had contributed to mission success and the safety of his fellow service members. The shot at Fort Bragg had been about pushing limits and testing capabilities. Today's engagement had been about serving his country and protecting American interests in a dangerous world. The mountains outside his window reminded him of home, of hunting trips with his grandfather, and of the lessons that had shaped his approach to military service. Some things never changed, even as technology and tactics continued to evolve. Patience, observation, and respect for environmental conditions remained fundamental to success in any endeavor requiring precision and skill. In the distance, Thompson could hear the sound of helicopters returning from other missions. The war continued, and there would be other opportunities to apply his unique capabilities in service of his nation. For now, though, he was satisfied with a job well done, and the knowledge that impossible shots sometimes became possible when conditions aligned with preparation and skill. 2 years after his successful combat engagement in Afghanistan, Thompson stood before a classroom of aspiring military snipers at the Special Operations Training Center. The faces looking back at him represented the next generation of American marksmen, eager to learn from someone whose achievements had become legendary within special operations communities. "Extreme long-range shooting isn't magic," Thompson began his lecture, deliberately deflating some of the mystique that surrounded his reputation. "It's applied physics combined with environmental awareness and disciplined technique." The students included experienced military personnel from all branches, selected for advanced marksmanship training based on demonstrated skill and operational experience. Many had heard stories about Thompson's impossible shots, but few understood the methodical approach that made such achievements possible. "Who can tell me the primary factors that influence bullet trajectory at distances beyond 1,500 meters?" Thompson asked the class. Hands shot up around the room as students eager to demonstrate their knowledge volunteered answers. Thompson called on a Marine Corps sergeant who had recently completed deployment in Iraq. "Gravity, wind resistance, atmospheric pressure, temperature variations," the Marine replied confidently. "Good start. What else?" A Navy petty officer added. "Humidity levels, altitude effects on air density, bullet spin characteristics." Thompson nodded approval. "All correct. Now, which of these factors changes most significantly during bullet flight time at extreme ranges?" The question required deeper thinking about how environmental conditions affected bullets differently at various points during extended trajectories. Several students exchanged uncertain glances before attempting answers. "Wind direction?" suggested an Army specialist. "Wind can change, but there's something more fundamental," Thompson replied. "Think about what the bullet experiences during a 6-second flight." The hint directed their attention to altitude effects that weren't immediately obvious to shooters accustomed to shorter-range engagements. At extreme distances, bullets traveled through significantly different atmospheric layers. "Air density varies with altitude," offered an Air Force Staff Sergeant. "The bullet experiences different atmospheric conditions at different heights during its trajectory." "Exactly. At extreme range, your bullet might climb 800 meters above your firing position before descending to the target. Air density at that altitude is different from what you measure at ground level." Thompson moved to a diagram showing bullet trajectory over mountainous terrain. The arc illustrated how projectiles at extreme range traveled through multiple atmospheric layers with varying characteristics. Traditional ballistics software assumes uniform atmospheric conditions across the flight path, he explained. In reality, temperature, pressure, and humidity change with altitude. These variations can cause significant trajectory deviations that can't be predicted by standard calculations. The lesson highlighted why extreme long-range shooting required more than just advanced equipment and ballistic software. Environmental factors that were negligible at normal combat ranges became critical variables at distances beyond 3,000 meters. So how do you compensate for altitude effects? Asked the Marine Sergeant. Experience and observation, Thompson replied. Learn to read how atmospheric conditions vary in different terrain types. Understand how temperature inversions affect air density. Watch how heat shimmer and mirage effects change throughout the day. The explanation sounded frustratingly imprecise to students accustomed to technical solutions and quantified procedures. Military training typically emphasized repeatable processes that could be applied consistently across different situations. Can you give us specific techniques for reading atmospheric conditions? Pressed the Navy petty officer. Thompson had anticipated this question and had prepared practical exercises to demonstrate environmental awareness techniques. We'll spend the afternoon outside, observing natural indicators that reveal atmospheric conditions. The field exercise took place on ranges overlooking mountainous terrain similar to what many students would encounter in operational environments. Thompson guided them through systematic observation of environmental factors that influenced shooting conditions. Look at that ridge line about 2,000 meters away, he directed, pointing toward a distant mountain peak. What do you see? Students peered through spotting scopes and binoculars, reporting various observations about the terrain and atmospheric conditions. I see heat shimmer rising from the rocks, reported one student. Vegetation appears to be moving differently at various elevations, added another. Thompson encouraged more detailed observation. Notice how the heat shimmer behaves differently at different altitudes. See how trees at higher elevations show wind effects that aren't present at lower levels. The exercise continued for several hours as students learned to correlate atmospheric indicators with measurable environmental data. Thompson demonstrated how traditional meteorological instruments provided valuable information, but couldn't capture the complexity of atmospheric variations across extended ranges. Weather stations give you point-specific data, he explained. But your bullet travels through multiple microclimates during its flight. Learning to read those variations gives you information that instruments can't provide. As afternoon progressed to evening, atmospheric conditions changed noticeably. Temperature differences became more pronounced, wind patterns shifted, and atmospheric pressure variations created different environmental characteristics. This is the time of day when I made the shot at Fort Bragg, Thompson noted. Thermal effects create more stable atmospheric layers. Wind patterns become more predictable. Students observed how changing conditions affected their ability to see targets clearly at distance. Mirage effects that had been minimal during midday became more pronounced as temperature differences increased. How often do you get ideal conditions for extreme long-range shots? Asked the Army specialist. Rarely, Thompson admitted. Maybe 5% of the time in most environments. That's why these capabilities can't be planned as primary tactics. The honest assessment disappointed students who had hoped to learn techniques that could be applied regularly in combat operations. Thompson's success stories were impressive, but their practical application was limited by environmental constraints. During the evening classroom session, Thompson addressed the psychological aspects of extreme long-range shooting that were often overlooked in technical discussions. Confidence at extreme range comes from thorough preparation and honest assessment of limitations, he explained. Know what you can do, understand what conditions allow success, and don't attempt shots beyond your capabilities. How do you maintain steady nerves when attempting shots that everyone says are impossible? Asked the Marine Sergeant. Don't think about whether others consider it possible, Thompson replied. Focus on executing proper technique. If you've done your homework on environmental conditions and your fundamentals are solid, trust your preparation. The mental discipline required for extreme precision shooting was similar to what special operations personnel developed for other high-stress situations. Success depended on training, preparation, and the ability to perform under pressure. Thompson shared experiences from his combat deployment in Afghanistan, describing how operational pressures had added complexity to technical challenges. Students were particularly interested in how mission requirements influenced shooting decisions. In combat, you have to balance ideal shooting conditions against tactical necessities, he explained. Sometimes you take a shot that's technically difficult because mission requirements don't allow waiting for perfect conditions. How do you make that judgment call? asked the Air Force Staff Sergeant. Experience, mission importance, availability of backup options. It's not a formula you can calculate. You develop judgment through training and operational experience. The conversation highlighted the difficulty of teaching decision-making skills that came from years of experience in complex situations. Technical shooting skills could be taught through structured curricula, but operational judgment required exposure to diverse scenarios and learning from both successes and failures. As the training week progressed, students attempted increasingly challenging shots under Thompson's supervision. None achieved the extreme ranges of his most famous demonstrations, but all improved their understanding of environmental factors and their ability to read atmospheric conditions. "I can see wind effects I never noticed before," commented the Navy petty officer after a particularly challenging exercise. But translating those observations into ballistics corrections is still difficult. Takes time, Thompson acknowledged. Environmental awareness develops slowly through consistent practice in different conditions. The final day of training included a comprehensive exercise that tested students' ability to integrate technical skills with environmental observation. Shooting distances were challenging but achievable, allowing everyone to experience success while applying newly learned techniques. Thompson observed each student's approach to problem-solving, noting how different personalities and backgrounds influenced their ability to adapt to changing conditions. Military experience was valuable, but civilian backgrounds in hunting or outdoor activities often provided relevant skills that could be applied to precision shooting challenges. Best performers usually combine technical training with practical field experience, he noted during the final debrief. Classroom knowledge needs to be reinforced by time spent outdoors in different environments. The training program had been designed to be realistic about what could be accomplished in a short time frame, while providing foundational knowledge for continued development. Thompson understood that creating expert long-range shooters required years of practice and exposure to diverse conditions. "What should we focus on for continued improvement after this course?" asked the Marine sergeant. "Seek opportunities to shoot in different environments," Thompson recommended. "Desert, mountains, coastal areas, different seasons. Each environment teaches you something new about how atmospheric conditions affect bullet trajectory." As students departed for their respective units, Thompson reflected on the challenges of teaching skills that had taken him decades to develop. The training had been successful in raising awareness and providing foundational knowledge, but developing true expertise would require individual commitment to continued learning and practice. Colonel Martinez, the training center commander, approached Thompson after the final class had concluded. "Feedback from students has been excellent. They understand the complexity involved and have realistic expectations about capability development." "That was the goal," Thompson replied. "Better to understand limitations honestly than to have unrealistic expectations about quick solutions. Pentagon is interested in expanding this program. Think it's worth the investment?" Thompson considered the question carefully. His experience had taught him that extreme long-range capabilities were valuable in specific circumstances, but not universally applicable to military operations. Selective implementation, he recommended. Identify personnel with aptitude and interest, provide advanced training, but don't try to make it a universal capability. Most military missions don't require these skills. The conversation reflected ongoing debates within military circles about balancing specialized capabilities with broad-based training programs. Resources were limited, and training decisions had long-term implications for force readiness and effectiveness. Walking back to his quarters that evening, Thompson thought about the young faces in the classroom and the challenges they would face in their military careers. Some would pursue advanced marksmanship training and potentially develop capabilities similar to his own. Others would apply basic principles to improve their conventional shooting skills. All would benefit from understanding that exceptional achievement resulted from patient development of fundamental skills rather than shortcuts or technological solutions. The lessons learned in pursuit of extreme precision shooting had broader applications to military service and life in general. The mountains visible in the distance reminded Thompson of hunting trips with his grandfather, of lessons learned about patience and observation that had shaped his entire approach to military service. Those early experiences had provided the foundation for everything that followed. Tomorrow would bring new training cycles and different students. Thompson looked forward to sharing hard-earned knowledge with the next generation of American warriors, knowing that somewhere among them might be individuals who would push the boundaries of what was considered possible even further than he had. The quiet satisfaction of teaching and mentoring provided rewards different from but equally meaningful as operational achievements. His legacy would be measured not just by his own accomplishments, but by the capabilities he helped develop in others who would carry forward the mission of defending American interests around the world. In the end, that was what mattered most, preparing others to serve with skill, dedication, and the quiet confidence that came from thorough preparation and honest self-assessment. The impossible shots were memorable, but the everyday professionalism and competence of American military personnel was what truly protected the nation and its values.